Yeah, is this working? Okay, as always, please give me a thumbs up if the audio and the sound, if the audio and the visual is okay. I thought we'd start out by talking about this clip. This came out just a couple days ago on March 18th, and looks like it's gotten 46,000 views. More down likes than up likes. I should probably like this from greensformonetaryreform.com. I'll be uploading this lecture to greensformonetaryreform.com as well. Please give us a like and share any comments you have from the lecture on there. And also, if you're joining us this coming Monday night now on Activate Media, we're calling this event A People's History of Money. And big thanks to my old Occupy comrade, Patrick Wilson, for agreeing to help spread the word on this lecture, for agreeing to mic check this lecture. So anyway, Sarah Silverman wants us to take our money out of our bank accounts and to put it into credit unions, money cooperatives. She did this, and I'm not going to play the clip, of course, but she was watching the Dakota Access Pipeline issue unfold, and she realized that bankers are the problem. Bankers are the ones funding the pipeline, which is true, and so she thinks that we need to do something more proactive than merely protesting, which is also true, but she thinks moving money from the banks into credit unions, like many other people, is like an alternative, divestment. This was one of the bigger successes of Occupy Wall Street earlier on in the movement. It helped amplify the Move Your Money movement. And I'm glad she's starting this conversation. I'm glad she wants us to watch where we spend our money, as she points out in the clip. But the issue isn't just where we spend our money. If we review just a little bit to what I lectured on last week, talking about how we use private bank credit for money, the question isn't where are we spending our money. The question is, what are we making our money out of? Trying to take a more radical approach to the subject. So, what do we make our money out of? In this country, we make our money out of debt. We make our money out of private bank credit. When banks make loans to individuals like you, me, Sarah Silverman, when they make loans to governments, like ours, the United States government or any other, or even corporations, for like big bailouts or stuff like that, new money is injected into the economy. New money is created. That debt circulates as money. You can go back and check out the class materials on the introduction and not Oranges and Money Systems. There's materials here in the introduction you can check out. So the point is, moving our money out of the banks isn't going to systematically stop the banks from funding pipelines. Moving our money out of the banks in no way prevents the banks from funding pipelines. Like, it's a common fallacy that banks take our money. Like, banks don't take our deposits and then loan them out to other people. That's not the way our system works. They just make the loan out, and then that's the money itself that circulates. So Sarah's whole idea that moving money out of a credit union is not going to create any sort of systematic change. It's not going to systematically redistribute wealth. It's not going to stop the systematic destruction of our environment. It's not going to stop the systematic funding of the destruction of our environment. We have to get more radical here. Our celebrities need to be educated on how money is actually made. If Sarah Silverman really wanted to do some good in terms of stopping the pipelines from being funded, she should be demanding that Congress hold hearings on monetary creation and monetary reform. Sarah Silverman, we would hope, we'll tweet this lecture to her later. I hope that she would read the National Emergency Employment Defense Act, endorse it, and tell her Congress rep and all of her fans to endorse it as well, if she's serious about watching where we spend our money. The NEAT Act will force our Congress to spend our money on social infrastructure like environmentally friendly energy alternatives. Straight up, it'll fund a new Manhattan project. It'll fund livable wages, creating a green new energy infrastructure for our country. The NEAT Act also pays off all our student debt, which is why I'm here. And there's a new addendum to the NEAT Act, which I believe, if we understand it correctly, means that students who have already begun to pay their debt off will be reimbursed for money that they shouldn't have had to pay in the first place, which is pretty cool. And of course, the NEAT Act provides public housing assistance. It provides fully funded political elections, and pretty much anything else we want. There's a new monetary authority that will make sure that money is spent into existence rather than borrowed from a private banking cartel of the usual suspects on Wall Street. So, please tweet Sarah Silverman. I'm going to upload this lecture onto Greens for Monetary Reform on YouTube. Please tweet the link to her and tell her to ask what is money made of. So before we move on to what money was made of in ancient Rome, I just want to take you guys back just to review a little bit of what we talked about last week. That it's important to keep the main themes in mind when you read this. All these chapters, who defines money and who controls money. This is how society is being controlled. And so, real quick, want to give a shout out to a connection of mine on LinkedIn named Dennis Paggio. He's a strategic planner for solving unsolvable societal problems. He sent me a really interesting link here from Denise Schmantz-Besserat, and a lot of really cool resources here I have yet to really delve into. But this clip here on the origins of writing, she talks about the ancient clay Sumerian tablets, and really good description of all that. The main punchline here, though, that she talks about is that counting comes before writing. Writing evolved from counting, and all of this, of course, according to the archaeological evidence, comes from debt itself. These clay tablets were used to record debt. So, someone else, Marx, for example, talks about consciousness. All the philosophers are talking about consciousness, right? Marx talks about labor as being the basis of consciousness. We have to work in order to satisfy our material needs, and this determines what we think. It's that like religion determines what we think. We make up religion, not the other way around. But Marx's understanding of history is very limited. It's very theoretical, very ideological, and this archaeological evidence of these debt tablets suggests that debt actually has a lot to do with the birth of human consciousness, which is exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche talked about. So, in the past, and before, these tablets, the other thing too is that what we see, the transactions being recorded consist of seed and animals. These things were considered money. Money was alive in the ancient world. Money had the ability to actually reproduce itself. And then, of course, once we started switching to representations of that living power, once we started switching to metallic representations to symbolize, a certain amount of cows, or a certain amount of grain, that's when things got interesting. That's when conceptually things got confusing. Zarlenga calls this the usury era, and points out that the usury era began in ancient Sumeria, when these tablets are from, and the whole idea that that's the whole idea that that you could collect interest back on a metal, on an inert barren metal that doesn't reproduce itself. Metal can't have little metal babies like a cow or plants. So when animals and seeds were lent out, it would be customary to return those animals or those seeds with any offspring or any other plants that were produced, over the harvest. That's where this whole tradition of interest comes from. And so back when money was alive, you would return the product of that. So when people started loaning out money, coin, and expecting more coin back than the original sum borrowed, usury, that's a holdover. That's a conceptual confusion between corn and cows and other forms of accepted currency in the ancient world with metal, inert metal. How are we doing on the audio there? Is everyone hearing me cool? So anyway, Nietzsche and the Genealogy of Morals in the second essay has a really, really important, eerie passage, oft-cited passage, that I want to take you to with regards to this whole idea of debt and consciousness. This is from, you got to reread this is an important book for those of you who are familiar with social philosophy. There'd be no Foucault without Nietzsche, of course. So, this is from the second essay on page 44 of my copy. He's talking about how that other murky affair, the sense of guilt, the whole matter of bad consciousness, he wants to know how this originated. And he noticed that the central moral concept of guilt, Schuld in German, I believe, originated from the very material concept of debt, Schulden. And he also talks about how punishment, as a form of repayment, evolved along with this too. So debt, according to Nietzsche, is also the birth of criminal justice, the birth of discipline and punishment, to borrow Foucault's phrase. And you really need to read the whole thing. It's hard to summarize this without getting lost into it, just looking at all of this. So, throughout the longest period of human history, punishment was not exacted because the troublemaker was held responsible for his action. That is, it was not exacted on the assumption that only the guilty man was to be punished, but rather, just as nowadays, parents still punish their children out of anger at harm done. Anger which is then taken out on the person who causes it, albeit held in check and modified by the idea that any damage somehow has an equivalent and really can be paid off, even if this is through the pain of the culprit. This whole idea that pain and punishment, pain as a substitute for money. Where has this ancient, deeply rooted, and by now perhaps ineradicable idea, this idea of the equivalence between damage and pain, drawn its strength from? I have already given it away. From the contractual relationship between creditor and debtor, which is as old as the concept of legal subjects itself, and which points back in turn to the fundamental forms of buying, selling, exchange, wheeling, and dealing. So, creditor and debtor, there's the original primal relationship, even older in a way than parent and child. So Marx's whole notion that, bourgeoisie and proletariat, one oppressed class, he talks about aristocracy and changes. Our view of history is that history has always been dominated, or at least Western history, by creditors and debtors. So, there's a little bit more to say here. Let us be clear about the logic of this whole form of exchange. It is alien enough. The equivalence is established by the fact that instead of a direct compensation for the damage done, i.e. instead of money, land, possessions of whatever sort, a sort of pleasure is conceded to the creditor as a form of repayment and recompense. The pleasure of being able to vent his power without a second thought on someone who is powerless. The enjoyment, de faire le mal pour le plaisir de le faire, pardon my French, the pleasure of violation. The enjoyment will be prized all the more highly the lower the creditor stands in the social order, and can easily appear to him as the choicest morsel, even as a foretaste of a higher rank. By means of the punishment inflicted on the debtor, the creditor partakes of a privilege of the masters. At last, he too has the opportunity to experience the uplifting feeling of being entitled to despise and mistreat someone as beneath them, or at least, in cases where the actual power and execution of punishment has already passed to the authorities, to see this person despised and mistreated. So this compensation consists in entitlement and right to cruelty. And again, he goes on to talk about how can revenge provide adequate compensation. So this whole idea, the pleasure of violation, birth of consciousness, this passage, there's a lot to be taken away from it. David Graeber, who we talked about in our last lecture as well, wrote a book called Debt, The First 5,000 Years. Again, helped bring some credibility and some General Assembly procedures to Occupy Wall Street. You know, he refers to the same passage in Nietzsche as well, and he talks about the implications of this, how this differs, how this completely shatters, you know, the economist myth of barter as being the primordial sort of relationship that money replaced. You know, this idea of the pleasure of violation as opposed to Smith's invisible hand. Smith, too, we will remember, saw the origins of language, and hence of human thought, as lying in a propensity to exchange one thing for another, in which he also saw the origins of the market. The urge to trade, to compare values, is the very thing that makes us intelligent beings and different from other animals. Society comes later, which means our ideas about responsibilities to other people first take shape in strictly commercial terms. According to Smith. Unlike with Smith, however, it never occurred to Nietzsche that you could have a world where all such transactions immediately cancel out. Any system of commercial accounting, he assumed, will produce creditors and debtors. In fact, he believed that it was from this very fact that human morality emerged. Note, he says, how the German word Schuld means both debt and guilt, as I showed. So, he goes on. The main point here, though, Graeber argues about Nietzsche's exercise, is that we're not dealing with the real historical argument, but with the purely imaginative exercise. And, of course, he cites the passages just looked at. And Graeber writes that Nietzsche's premise in these passages is insane. There's every reason to believe that Nietzsche knew the premise was insane. In fact, that was the entire point. What Nietzsche is doing here is starting out from the standard common sense assumptions about the nature of human beings prevalent in his day, and to a large extent still prevalent, that we are rational calculating machines, that commercial self-interest comes before society, that society itself is just a way of putting a kind of temporary lid on the resultant conflict. That is, he is starting out from ordinary bourgeois assumptions and driving them to a place where they can only shock a bourgeois audience. It's a worthy game, and no one has ever played it better, but it's a game played entirely within the boundaries of bourgeois thought. It has nothing to say anything that lies beyond that. The best response to anyone who wants to take seriously Nietzsche's fantasies about savage hunters chopping off pieces of each other's bodies for failure to remit are the words of an actual hunter-gatherer, an Inuit from Greenland made famous in the Danish writer Peter Freuchen's book of the Eskimo. Fridgen tells us how one day, after coming home hungry from an unsuccessful walrus hunting expedition, he found one of the successful hunters dropping off several hundred pounds of meat. He thanked him profusely. The man objected indignantly. "Up in our country, we are human," said the hunter. "And since we are human, we help each other. We don't like to hear anybody say thanks for that. What I get today, you may get tomorrow. Up here, we say that by gifts, one makes slaves, and by whips, one makes dogs." So again, think of Hobbes talking about how life was brutal and short, nasty, brutal, and short. Same that I would argue that life is nasty, brutal, and short is really the underlying premise of Adam Smith's invisible hand, that market forces are somehow what make life ordered. Nietzsche is actually, ironically, his observations, even though they're very cynical and even satire, according to Graeber, it still seems that his intellectual exercise corresponds with anthropological historical evidence. This whole idea that people were cruel before we started exchanging with one another, before we set up money, is completely false. As Graeber points out, from the anthropological evidence, these hunters talk about how up in war country, you're human, it's natural to share. It's not natural to be self-calculating in a monetary sense. And again, we see this abstraction from life, this monetary abstraction from life, this calculation. The hunter insisted that being truly human meant refusing to make such calculations, refusing to measure or remember who had given what to whom, for the precise reason that doing so would inevitably create a world where we begin comparing power with power, measuring, calculating, and reducing each other to slaves or dogs through debt. I want to say one more word about this whole pleasure of violation theme as well, too, before we move on to ancient Rome, and how this plays out in the ancient world. It's important to remember that in the ancient world, we see this process by which metal starts to replace livestock and seeds. First it was silver, but then eventually gold. And Zarlenga, of course, talks about how the Greek temples played a really important role in monetizing gold. So just going to the text again. Monetizing gold, declaring a fixed amount of it of equal to one cow, would alleviate the problems of abundance. Further, more abstract money is created, symbolizes substantial wealth in a small quantity, but a cow is harder to kind of carry around with you. So the temples were the primary holders of gold. Gold wasn't circulated throughout day-to-day society as a form of exchange. People shared resources. Temples held such a large portion of the existing gold that they could control it. It would be difficult for others to obtain substantial amounts of it except through them, and they could create a value for it by accepting it for their services, in quotation marks, which people considered a necessary part of life, even, for example, to pay for the temple prostitutes as described by Herodotus and Strabo for later periods. So, we gotta sit on dirty old Uncle Freud's couch for a second here in the course of our intellectual journey in order to talk about the role of the world's oldest profession in the magical transformation of gold into money. Apparently, prostitution played a big role. Prostitutes were probably the first people accepting money as payment for their services. The priests were the original bankers. Okay, skip ahead a little bit. Jesus separated the church from the money lending business. What are the money lenders still spending their money on to this very day, though? Prostitutes. So, the lost science of money reveals not only that Adam Smith's invisible hand didn't really exist in terms of shaping market forces. What we're looking at here, the lost science of money, the lost history of money, reveals that there's actually a big, erect, invisible phallus shaping market forces here. We need to start talking about the invisible penis of Adam Smith more so than the invisible hand of Adam Smith in terms of what shapes forces and what creates process of debt. Quick to the audience here, I'd really appreciate it if someone out there would be willing to let me know if anybody knows, did Freud speak about money at all? Did Lacan or Fromm or any of these other psychoanalysts, did they ever talk about the neuroses attached to money issues at all? I'm sure they must have. What did they say? You know, I want to go back and look at the different titles of Freud's books in chronological order, you know, in conjunction with the lost history of money. You know, I want to see the changes in society as we start to examine the changes in banking, or the changes in our monetary systems throughout history. And so, just to sort of sum up from last week, what we saw, you know, after gold becomes monetized, things get really messed up in ancient Greece. There's lots of shortages. The bankers are moving money from one city to another. They're causing all kinds of problems. You know, a bad harvest would also be another issue. Dick Graeber writes about this a lot, how people would fall into debt traps when harvests were bad. And so what happened, there were monetary reformers. It was Solon in Athens and Lycurgus in Sparta, and they created new monetary systems. They created public money systems. The Pellinors in Sparta were these iron bars that were soaked in vinegar when they were hot, so they were worthless. And you can read in Plutarch the changes that happened within society, how crime disappeared, and how trade improved, quality of goods improved, quality of food improved. And so before we move on, though, to talk about monetary systems in ancient Rome, any interesting comments on that end?
Yeah, Matthew Spidell is with us.
Oh, hey, dude, what's up, yo? What's up, Spidell?
He just commented saying that don't forget, gold and other metals have a real value. Gold is one of the best conductors. It's considered a precious metal, but now we exchange pieces of useless paper.
Right, and we talk about that in the last lecture, too. We talk about commodity money versus fiat money, and how commodity money versus money by law, and how people confuse the actual utility of gold, the jewelry you can make with it, the conductivity of it. Like, yes, it has a use value, to use a Marxist term, and people like Adam Smith, the economists like Adam Smith, think that this use value is what makes that commodity a suitable form of money. Our argument is that that's exactly what ruins societies. Money should be worthless. Like, we shouldn't be trading gold for worthless pieces of money. Gold shouldn't be equivalent to money. Money should be an abstract unit of exchange. Money, like right now, it's not tied to gold. You know, a dollar, a Federal Reserve note, isn't equivalent to any weight of gold, as far as I understand it, as much as it's related to oil now. We talk about black gold and the petrodollar. This whole commodity view of money is exactly what we're arguing against in the lost history, the lost science of money. You know, we take an Aristotelian view of money. You know, this isn't to say, you know, we look at history and we see how different money systems help those societies grow or collapse. And the thing that we find, you know, the thing that Aristotle himself found after observing the reforms of Solon in Athens and Lycurgus in Sparta, is that money should be based on law. It should not be based on the use value of a particular commodity. The thing that makes the money valuable is the fact that society, the community, the government defines it as an acceptable measure of value. And there's a bigger point here. So the other thing that you get reading Graeber's book too, switching back and forth here, you get the sense that it's not a major point he's pointing out, but Graeber's arguing that there's no such thing as society without debt, essentially. And the thing that you see in this is that there's really no such thing as society without money. He talks about the myth of barter. There's even if you take people and lock them up in prisons where they don't have access to money in a typical way, say you put people in a prisoner of war camp, even more degrading human conditions where they don't have typical money sources, people will create fiat currencies out of like cigarettes, for example. Goffman observed this as well. He talked about that in Asylums. This whole idea that money should be fiat, it should be limited by law, not determined based on the use value of some sort of commodity. And we'll see later on, Zarlenga argues that Marx took the exact same commodity view of money as Adam Smith. Marx's whole idea of money is that it's based on the intrinsic utility of money, and that's not true. That's what the economists would have you believe. So I don't know if that answers the question at all. Anything else pop in there?
He mentioned he pretty much agrees paper money is simply a symbol of foreign debt. Well, yeah, paper money is simply a symbol of foreign debt, he said.
So the problem isn't that we use paper money. That's actually fine. The problem isn't that our money has no value. The problem is that a private banking cartel owns our money. A private banking cartel issues this worthless money out of nothing and expects money back. And again, we can see how this is a tradition. This is a holdover from when, baby cows and extra seed was given back, was returned, as interest. The fact that we print money out of nothing is fine as long as that's a public utility. The public should be printing money out of nothing. The government, ironically, here I am as an anarchist arguing for government control over our monetary supply. The problem is when we have private bankers injecting into our money society through warfare, essentially, as opposed to social infrastructure. So, our argument here isn't end the Fed. We want to keep the money flowing, but we want public U.S. dollars flowing through our society without our government having to pay interest to the private banks. How does the government pay the interest to the private banks? Through our taxes, of course, which is completely unconstitutional. Some of the right-wingers got some important stuff to say. Dude, thanks for chiming in, Spidell. This is all right on topic, man. Thanks for joining me here. For those of you that don't know, Spidell is the official artist of 420 Fight Club. 420 Fight Club is our direct action. 420 Fight Club is the militant wing of the monetary reform movement here in New York City, which is still growing. And we practice martial arts out in front of the Fed to raise awareness for monetary reform. Every martial art is the legacy of some damn war. And all wars are bankers' wars. So we practice martial arts out in front of the Federal Reserve in order to show them what real warriors look like, and to show them that real warriors, the best wars are the most nonviolent. That's Sun Tzu. So, let's move on here. We only got so much time. We got plenty of time. But we're talking about ancient Rome here, and we're going to look at how their monetary systems have changed. So we're going to start during the early period here, 717 BC up to 534 BC, King Numa and King Tullius. And then the unification, the Republic period, and things we're going to talk about how the monetary system essentially, the public monetary system essentially collapsed during the Punic War, and then how, latifundia here, that's basically a Roman slave plantation. This is when all the wars of conquest started. That's when the dictatorship of Rome started with Caesar as well. And we're going to talk about how money creation played an important role in that transition. So, Zarlenga's argument is that the growth of Rome from a small village in the 8th century BC to creator and ruler of the world order resulted in large part from her bronze money. In the East, gold and silver were being coined as money, but Rome chose to base her money on bronze, a mixture of mainly copper, some tin, and a bit of lead. And not just commodity bronze, but monetized pieces called numi, or nomisma. So, we're talking about King Numa Pompilius, and he isolated Rome in terms of its monetary supply. So King Numa from 716 to 672 BC institutionalized the use of bronze instead of gold and silver, and this had really far-reaching consequences. One important consequence, according to Zarlenga, was the disenfranchisement of the gold-silver hoards from the Eastern temples and Eastern merchants. Gold would still be used and traded in Rome as commodities, as merchandise. It still had a commodity value, as Spidell would point out, even in the ancient world before we knew about electricity. Or did we? Go check out the Pyramid Code. They probably had electricity back in the ancient times. But Rome didn't really need gold for foreign trade, or they didn't need it for internal trade. So the ability of the Eastern temples and merchants to control and disrupt Rome's money supply would have been reduced, and Rome was in a better chance to control her own destiny. So, this is some speculation here now. We're talking about King Numa, and he instituted bronze. So, we don't think that this was an accidental decision. There's a lot of stuff lost, but Numa was renowned for his intelligence. He was a very religious person in the old ways. He was a Pythagorean, so he was a pagan. He was a very highly religious pagan, and he did a lot of really interesting stuff. I want to read out to you in terms of some of his reforms. So, the portion of the lands that Rome possessed in the beginning was very small. It was a small village. Romulus enlarged them all by war. But then Numa divided all this land of Rome among the indigent community, or commonality, wishing to do away with that extreme want, which is a compulsion to dishonesty, and by turning the people to husbandry, farming, to bring them as well as their lands into better order. For there's no employment that gives so quick a relish for peace as husbandry and country life, which leaves men all kind of courage that makes them ready to fight in defense of their own, while it destroys the license that breaks out into acts of injustice and rapacity. So Numa hoped agriculture would be a sort of charm to captivate the affections of his people into peace, and viewed it as a means to moral rather than economic profit. And he divided all the lands into several parcels, which he called pagus, or parishes. This is the beginning of parishes. And so he set up overseers for those. He did a lot of other stuff. This is the beginning of not only parishes, but King Numa was also the person to create the high priest position in Rome, the Pontificus Maximus. I think I messed that up, but that's the role that the Pope grew out of. King Numa was the person who created the original role that led to the Pope. So the other thing that he did in terms of his reforms that we know, this is from Plutarch's life, mind you, and so of all the things he did, the most commended was his distribution of the people by their trades into companies or guilds, for as the city consisted, or rather did not consist of, but was divided into two different tribes, the diversity between which could not be effaced in the meantime prevented all unity and caused perpetual tumult and ill blood, reflecting how hard substances that do not readily mix, when in the lump may, by being beaten into powder, in that minute form he combined, he resolved to divide the whole population into a number of small divisions, and thus hope by introducing other distinctions to obliterate the original and great distinction which would be lost among the smaller. So distinguish the whole people by the several arts and trades. He formed the companies of musicians, goldsmiths, carpenters, dyers, shoemakers, skinners, braziers, and potters, and all other handcraftsmen. He composed and reduced into a single company, appointing everyone their proper courts, councils, and religious observances. So, in this manner, all facetious distinctions began for the first time to pass out of use, and no person any longer being either thought of or spoken of under the notion of Sabine, or Roman, or Romulan, or Tatian, the new division became a source of general harmony and intermixture. So this is the birth of divide and conquer, the distinction of people into their trades, the organization of people into the trades. For my sociologically literate or audience, this is the birth. We can almost see the beginnings of what Emile Durkheim would call organic social solidarity here in ancient Rome. Pretty interesting. So these are reforms that we know he did, and this is speculation now, but we're assuming that the decision to use bronze as money in Rome wasn't an accident. So Numa was descended from the Sabines, and they were a colony of the Lacedaemonians. I can't pronounce that correctly. The Spartans. The Sabines were a Spartan colony. And so Numa was probably aware of the ancient Spartan monetary system, being a highly educated person as well. And so he began casting bronze bars called the A's, also sometimes the Ace, A-C-E, if my boy Ace is watching, what's up? And this was 2.5 pounds of bronze in terms of our units. And you can see the little branch stamp that they have there. So, and the other interesting thing here too is that Plutarch is comparing Numa to Lycurgus in his biography, Parallel Lives. So, yeah, like I said, he inaugurated a new religious. Numa also started the Pontificus Maximus, existed all throughout Rome's history, continues today with the Pope and the Catholic Church, and we can see again the religious origins of money more so than the economic arguments that we're arguing against. We see the social, and then we see this religious use of money. So, the result of this decision to use bronze in Rome had an immediate domestic effect. The busy farmers of the Roman plains seem all the while to have cut themselves off from contact with the Phoenician traders, Africa, who so constantly bartered with the neighboring cities of Etruria. And this from Tenny Frank in his Economic History of Rome. The rest of this chapter, not even the rest of it, but I'm really glad that the Greens for monetary reform, again, I owe an unpayable debt of gratitude to Sue and Greens for monetary reform for organizing all this material, because Stephen Zarlenga gets into a lot of polemics with pneumatists, early historians of ancient Roman money, and with other economists, which can make reading this a little difficult to get through at a certain point. But one of the main points to drive home from all this right now, from the experience of Rome, and you're going to see the same thing in ancient Greece, and we're going to see the same thing, when we start talking about United States history, is that it's not unusual to find that an earlier system of money based on law was far superior in terms of concept than later ones that then tended to become dominated by special interest power functions. So the lost science of money is an argument against the myth of progress. This whole notion that we're living in a more sophisticated society than that which existed in the past is completely disproven by this history. It's a theme we're going to see again and again and again. Societies come to preponderance based on numisma, or the pelennors in ancient Greece, numisma in ancient Rome, continental currencies here in the U.S., greenbacks here in the U.S., and then there's degradation. The monetary supply is co-opted back by the bankers, and then all the poverty, all the wars start again. So the other monetary reformer, the king of Rome, King Servius, this became legal tender in Rome, stamped bronze, more pure form. And it was really interesting the way he did this. He monetized money through a census, so everyone had to contribute a certain coin per head, man paying one kind, women another, and children another. And so this way he could keep track of things going on in society. The most intriguing part of Servius's monetary reform was in connection with his new census system, as related in detail by Dionysius of Halicarnassus and Lucius Piso. Servius divided the city and the countryside into regions and required everyone of the same district to contribute a certain coin per head, men paying one kind, women another, and children yet another, and to know the numbers of those living, newly born, and died, and came of age. He prescribed which coin relatives were to contribute for each one into the treasury of Juno Lucinia for the newborn, into that of Libetinia for the deceased, into that of Juvenentus for those arriving at manhood. From the coins he would know every year the total of the inhabitants, and which of them were of military age. One of the earlier functions of money, again, we see an early form of state defining what money is based on accepting it for taxes, or in this case, census. About 84,000 persons were registered in Servius's first census, probably in 554 BC. Dionysius called the coins numismata, and a tribute imposed per head. Servius had designated 3 temple treasuries to accept per capita numisma payments, and failure to comply was made punishable by death and confiscation of property. This is an ancient example of the primary monetary principle that an abstract symbol can be given value by accepting it for taxes. So, moving on to the Roman Republic. There's some good slides here in terms of so after the kingships ended and senators set up. We had 2 houses, the patricians and the plebeians, the rich and the poor. Each had councils. The senators outnumbered the tribunes, who represented the plebes. And so in 406 BC, beginning of the Republic, bronze pieces were the only legal tender. It's important also that bronze being the only this probably had a lot to do with Zarlenga points out that the lex aeternia laws of Rome were written upon the return of the two Roman ambassadors who'd gone to Athens to study Solon's legislation. So again, there's an awareness, the ancient world is paying attention to other city-states. And Zarlenga notes how, the agricultural goods were monetized in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, directly based upon the experience of Athens, and the lex aeternia monetized sheep and cattle in ancient Rome. So the Republic's money system. So it was still this bronze system. There was silver coinage that was used during the early Republic period, but it wasn't used internally in Rome. It was used for trade with foreigners. It was circulated, mostly in the southern regions, so for foreign trade. It wasn't used for domestic issues. So this is another part of the book where it gets into a lot of polemics and a lot of different arguments with, the Adam Smith type school. Stephen Zarlenga sticks with the monetary historian Alexander Delmar, and there's an argument, there's a debate within this section of history as to whether or not Rome had a fiat monetary system. And obviously we're arguing that it did, or Stephen's arguing that it did. It looks like it was. He argues that the numismatists tended to view the value of its coin by its metal weight, its commodity value, but there's unmistakable evidence that Roman coins were worth more than their actual commodity content. The Roman coins were overvalued. They weren't all pure bronze at a certain point. They became devalued over time. They were melted down, in order to make more coins. There's more money circulating into society. At some point, the AS unit of 12 ounces of bronze becomes a standard in which the coins are issued, and the weight of the coin signifying AS was then continuously reduced. First it was 12 ounces, then it was 6 ounces after the first war with Carthage in 264 to 241 BC. Then it went down to 2 ounces in about 217 after the Second Punic War. Note how war is creating more inflation. Then it went down to 1 ounce at its end. And yet Delmar noted that nowhere in Roman history do there appear any complaints about these reductions of the weight of bronze itself in the money that was being circulated in Rome. Under this Bronze Nomisma, Republican Rome grew powerful, staying independent from Eastern power, and blocking the easy establishment of Eastern financial beachheads on Roman soil. Under this bronze money, Rome developed and gave the world a system of law that is still consulted after its 2,300 years, a legal system separate from religion to a higher degree than seen before in antiquity. Delmar wrote, Rome's numeri monetary system lasted 200 years, dates it from 385 BC, during which all that was admirable of Roman civilization saw its origin, its growth, and its maturity, like the aqueducts, for example, I would imagine. When the system fell, Rome lost its liberties. The state was to grow more powerful and dreaded, but that state and its people were no longer one. So, 33 BC, Rome dissolved Servius's Latin Federation. This is when the Republic starts. This is also when we start to see silver introduced into the monetary supply of Rome. But before I get to that, I want to go through this deck because the deck in the book depart a little bit here. There's a lot of existence, not only were these Roman coins overvalued according to Del Mar, there's no complaints, as we pointed out. Gold and silver weren't legal tender. They were used, again, trading in other countries. Mining wasn't permitted by private individuals. Mines were under the control of the state and the state alone. Another reason why we think that copper was used as a fiat currency in Rome. Again, a lot of this is speculation, but this is why this book needs to be vetted by professional historians and not by your humble narrator. So, restrictions in commerce of copper, the state had a lot of control over copper. So the fact that coins were made differently, there's differences in these coins, different sizes, different weights, different shapes. This fact is fatal to the theory of a commodity or an intrinsic system of money. These coins weren't used in circulation because they had intrinsic value. They were used because that's what the Senate of Rome decided they would use as money. So there's no uniformity. Copper was abundant. It was cheap in Rome. Easy to get a hold of. It was used in tools. We talked about how tools were used as money before coins. Money probably came after tools, or coins came after tools. And they had gold and silver in significant supplies, but they chose to go with bronze, even though they could have used gold. Like that King Numa deliberately wanted to get. He wanted sovereignty for Rome through sovereign currency, through bronze sovereign currency. Preposterous relation of copper to silver. A lot of this is still over my head, I'm not going to lie to you. But, so, another reason, the Numi was overvalued in Caligula's time. Remember Caligula? Malcolm McDowell played in an X-rated movie version of the most debaucherous Roman emperor ever. And Caligula was the first to break through the emission restrictions of Senate and monopolize the Numi himself and proceed to coin them as rapidly as possible. Numi was overvalued in Caligula's time. This supports that Numi was overvalued in prior times during the Commonwealth, and the power of Senate to keep emissions within a specific limit was greater. Again, Caligula's operations suggest that Rome had a fiat monetary system. And of course, the other thing here is that the Romans adopted the Greek name for money, numis, after the Greek nomisma, and they would have understood the significance of that term. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they all written of the importance of numerical systems of money, numeral systems of money, and the most revered of them all had recommended such a system for their ideal republic. And that's exactly what the Romans did. Zarlenga writes that the way that they used bronze within Rome for domestic affairs and gold and silver for foreign trade was exactly what Plato had established for his ideal republic, where citizens had token money for use with each other, but gold or silver were to be provided for foreign trading. So, things were working out pretty well for Rome. they were building a lot. They were doing a lot of farming. They were free. This is before we saw, mass slavery and stuff. So things started to change for Rome when they went to war with Carthage. The Punic Wars. This is when they went to war with Africa. It's kind of the beginning of Black Lives Matter in a way, I guess. You really want to take it back. So the Punic Wars outbreak in 264 BC. And there's circulation of silver bullion coins, but that's not legal tender within Rome. They were still using the ace signatum, ace grave, several different types of bronze coinage. But now, once Hannibal invaded, especially during the Second Punic War, remember, Hannibal crossed the Alps with all his elephants, and these elephants and his hordes started ravaging the countryside. Rome was no longer able to insulate her domestic economy from the silver coinage. Carthage's long-standing sophistication manipulating gold and silver pieces could thus translate into military danger for Rome. So, in about 212 BC, right after the Second Punic War with Carthage began, virtually all coins circulating in Italy and Sicily were replaced with the new silver denarius. And this historian Burnet couldn't fully explain why. Zarlenga writes, though, only when one understands that it was not the bronze commodity that gave money its value, but Rome's legal commitment concerning them, does it become clear that she could demonetize the coins in the hands of the enemy or in towns wavering their allegiance. Thus the old coinage cannot be used to pay for military operations against her, being Rome. So, if Burnet is correct about the demonetization, Rome demonetized its bronze currency and adopted silver as a wartime measure to isolate Carthaginian power. As Carthage is taking over more and more Roman territory and getting their coin, Rome doesn't want them to be able to use that coin to fund wars against them, so it switches to a new currency system. But in doing so, under these desperate measures, this is a big monetary error, according to Zarlenga. And so the denarius became part of the Roman monetary system. It was valued by law, but its issue was not limited. So over time, the issues of the silver coin became unlimited. It wasn't a fiat currency. It was similar to what we have now. Over time, they were reduced to their commodity value, and Rome lost control of its monetary system. After 150 BC, we see little bronze coinage issued. And so now we start to see Rome's first gold coinage after this war. Rome borrowed a lot of jewelry from its citizens in 218 BC and used 4,000 pounds of that to mint their first gold coins. And then, less than 2 decades later, that's when we start to see the isolation of Rome. And Pliny, the Elder, I believe. Yeah. It's in here. So, Pliny was writing about this new gold coinage. Pliny the Elder, he was an attorney and a writer in ancient Rome. The next crime committed against the welfare of mankind was on the part of him who was first to coin a denarius of gold, a crime the author of which is unknown. Would that gold could have been banished forever from the earth, accursed by universal report, reviled by the reproaches of all the best men, and looked upon as discovered only for the ruin of mankind. So, the fall of the Rome's bronze money system is interpreted by a lot of 19th and 20th century economists as progress. This age of conquest is seen as some sort of high achievement mark in Roman culture. The lost science of money, the lost history of money, looks at it a little bit differently. So, the end of Rome's monetary system meant that new money, new kinds of money, gold and silver money, new sources of money were flowing into Rome. And it was similar to the Attic drachmae of Greece, and the Romans treated them as equal. So there was monetary chaos in Rome now. Once reduced to using a commodity weight to signify money, Rome would be on a never-ending quest for precious metals, a great waste of resources and misdirection of energy. Even worse, since these metals were concentrated in eastern hordes, this handed power over to the east to assert its ancient ways on Rome. Pardon me. So once Rome starts using gold for money, that's when it has to get stuck into a pattern of constant war. Yeah?
Not really a question, more like a comment. William George is with us.
Yeah, hey, what's up, William?
He says, I like saying Rome had the perfect money in the Republic, and the empire that needed foreign exchange. Over time, the money became gold and silver based because of the need to buy resources in nations outside of Rome. They built magnificent and thus expensive structures far from the city of Rome. They had to use gold and silver to do that. Eventually, the people who owned the gold and silver got control of Rome, moved the capital to Constantinople, and this all ended with the most disastrous depression the world has ever known, the Dark Ages.
Right. And so, exactly. That's how the chapter ends. We're almost done with it. We not only see the loss of Roman sovereignty, we see the loss of the Roman capital. The capital of the Roman Empire moves from Rome to the east. And so, another thing that was interesting too, gold, the point between gold and war, right after they defeated Hannibal, there was a political thrust to start a new war with Macedon, where Alexander the Great was from. Apparently those benefiting from the warfare didn't want any eruption to their profiteering. So at first the war was rejected, but then a year later in 200 BC, a major war was started with Macedon, which lasted until 168 BC, giving no breathing space to Rome's citizen farmer soldiers. So prior to gold as a monetary source of money in ancient Rome, Italian agriculture consisted mainly of small peasant holdings. It soon became a mixed system of large-scale migratory herding between larger regions, larger-scale capital-intensive farming, like William George is talking about. Again, we see the destruction of the Commonwealth, the latifundia, the slavery plantation system starts. So the new Italy is a paradise for fruit trees and for profiteers, and a comfortable berth for oxen, but is a purgatory for evicted peasants and a hell for imported slaves, wrote Tony B. Kind of like the United States of America now. So, Tiberius, who was elected tribune and who tried to revolt against this new decay, wrote, according to Plutarch, the savage beasts in Italy have their particular dens, their places of refuge, but the men who bear arms and expose their lives for the safety of the country, the veterans, have nothing more than the air and the sunlight, and having no houses or settlements of their own, must wander from place to place with their wives and children. They fight and are slain to maintain the luxury and wealth of other men. They are called the masters of the world, but have not 1 foot of ground which they can call their own. again, parallel lives. The more things change, the more they stay the same. All this chaos. Here we have the rise of latifundia. This is the ancient Roman slave system. Land holdings. This is the beginning of urban homelessness. And so, in the midst of all this chaos, comes Julius Caesar, dictatorship. And again, this is the lesson, compare Trump to Caesar, I guess. Caesar deified himself like Alexander the Great did, and so Caesar's Italy was still based on gold. He didn't reform anything. Of course, his reign as dictator didn't last very long. Brutus whacked him, and after he did so, he created a coin to commemorate it. I don't know if you can see this here. There's a coin with 2 daggers that Brutus made after he hit him. It says Ede Mart. And the other thing is that after Caesar was assassinated, the official moneyers of Rome produced large coin supplies for Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, were the 3 men who were fighting for control over Rome. The deep-pocketed temples financed Octavian's battle for the succession, and so this is essentially the destruction of the old Roman ethos. And now this is the stage is set eventually for the sacking of the Roman Empire. We're going to talk more about the decline of the Roman Empire later, but this is when we start to see changes within Greek and Roman society. They start losing their character. Here's a passage from Zarlenga. Greek and Roman society was built on the concept of the subordination of the individual to the community, of the citizen to the state. It set the safety of the commonwealth as the supreme aim of conduct above the safety of the individual. Trained from infancy in this unselfish ideal, the citizens devoted their lives to the public service and were ready to lay them down for the common good, or if they shrank from the supreme sacrifice, it never occurred to them that they acted otherwise than basely preferring their personal existence to the interests of their country. All this was changed by the spread of Oriental religions, which inculcated the communion of the soul with God and its eternal salvation as the only object worth living for. The inevitable result of this selfish and immoral doctrine was to withdraw the devotee more and more from the public service. The saint and the recluse, disdainful of earth and wrapped in ecstatic contemplation of heaven, became in popular opinion the highest ideal of humanity, displacing the old ideal of the patriot and the hero who, forgetful of the self, lives and is ready to die for the good of his country. So, this new ethos, these new religion, include Christianity. This is one of the Eastern Oriental cults, I think Mid-Eastern. So there was no Christianity until Rome, until they got rid of their bronze monetary system. Once they got rid of their public money system, then Rome started to lose its sovereignty. There were some attempted reforms, but what we see now, as William talks about, is that we see all the gold and all the silver leaving Rome and going east. Trade with India. No sooner was Rome fully committed to gold and silver for her primary coinages when she began to run out of them. Trade with India was draining the monetary metals from the empire. Rome began importing feminine articles, the costly spices and perfumes from the east. To pay for them, she had no great mass of manufactured goods to offer. Payment had to be made for the most part in bullion. The resulting was a steady depletion of marks and precious metals. Think again here too, where are we getting all our shit from now? China. It's the same story. we're seeing all of these materials, not even as nice as the ones, the costly spices and perfumes they had back then. All the stuff getting sold in Walmart is coming from China, and we're not trading anything of value with them. We're just giving them more of our useless money, which is wrapping up our national debt and causing severe poverty for the rest of us. Even though it looks like our economy is growing, it just means that our debt is growing. So Diocletian, the Roman emperor, started off as a slave, tried to reform this stuff. He's ridiculed by other historians. This is after Rome shifted its capital to Constantinople. But then, so Diocletian, he resigned from the emperorship in disgust, retired to his home on the Dalmatian coast, and when he was pressured to resume the throne, he replied, "Would to God that you could see the herbs which I cultivate with my own hands at Salonika. You would not think of making me such a proposition." And then, of course, after we move to, before 324 AD, Constantine converted the pagan church to Christianity. Didn't completely triumph over paganism right away. It took time. Christianity inherited the pagan church's property, all of the empire, the position of Pontifex Maximus as well. And then the capital of the empire moves east to Byzantium. So that's pretty much where we're going to leave off now. We'll finish up. We'll review everything a little bit. We talk about next week when we talk about a monetary view of Rome's decline. But again, the big thing to keep in mind here is the way that we see societies emerge with the public money system, and then we see a shift to a private money system with the outbreak of war. These bankers, trading somehow, they create a war, they get everybody all riled up, and that's when they can take control over the monetary system. The war acts as a misdirection. And the other thing we see, this flow, this trade between East and West. Really interesting stuff. You guys must be exhausted from listening to me talk so long. Any comments or anything?
Yeah, just a question to follow up with an earlier discussion.
Sure.
Matthew Spedel was asking, how, if you had the power to make it so, would you return the power currency to the people? And as a self-proclaimed anarchist, what do we do about the roads, power, water, and whatnot? It's a common question people have for anarchists, and wouldn't the solution you pose technically be a governing body, hence government?
Yeah, so great. Thank you, Spedel. Thank you for setting me up, because we've already had this conversation. You already know the answer to all those questions. The answer to your question in terms of how do we return the power of creating currency to the American people is through the National Emergency Employment Defense Act, written by Dennis Kucinich. Here we go. You click on Solution on Greens for Monetary Reform. You can see links to the NEAT Act and HR 2990 of Congress. So this creates the sovereign currency. This creates that system of nomisma, that fiat money that we want. Money by law. The thing is that the government will actually be spending this to existence on infrastructure, on education, on housing, on fully funded political elections and stuff like that. Whereas in the past we see it spent on war. So that's the solution. Now, as to the ideological challenges you raise, as a self-proclaimed anarchist, how is it I'm advocating for government control over our monetary supply? This is something I have to talk about with Occupy colleagues all the time. If you ask me what anarchy means, you ask 10 different anarchists what anarchy means, you might get 10 to 100 different opinions based on the anarchist. But My understanding is that the word anarchy from ancient Greek means a society without rulers. Anarchy doesn't mean no rules. That's chaos. That's completely different. Anarchy is actually a form of democracy. It's a form of order that doesn't have kings. It doesn't have philosophers ruling anything, like Plato suggested. It doesn't have bankers, oligarchy, as opposed to that as well. So anarchy doesn't mean no rules. It doesn't mean no social structure either. My understanding as an anarchist, my strain of anarchy is anarcho-syndicalism. I sort of mentioned in the last lecture, it's sort of a synthesis of Marxist thought with practical tactics. Whereas the communists say, we need to go take the factories, we need to go occupy the means of production. Anarchists, and in history, the Spanish anarchists, they more or less said, no, we're just going to go make our own means of production. We're just going to go create our own factories, like the Mondragon factory, which is incredibly successful now, which Noam Chomsky points to all the time. And their own schools. They create their own schools. There's a really great book by the anarchist historian Paul Averich, who was a colleague of my teacher back at the University of Milwaukee, Michael Gordon. And it's a book called The Modern School Movement, about this anarchist school system that proliferated, started in New York in this country, but it proliferated all throughout the country. They had branches everywhere. And so this whole idea that anarchy is opposed to order is what the mainstream media wants you to think anarchy is. There's a lot of stereotypes about anarchy. Anarchists are misrepresented. And there's a lot of people who call themselves anarchists, these black bloc types, who, in my opinion, play into this whole media-driven idea of anarchy as being orderlessness and chaos and, socially acceptable violence against property. That's not my anarchy. That's not how I understand anarcho-syndicalism. Anarchy is about peace. It's about order. It's about creativity. Anarchy promotes education and art as opposed to violence. That's how I've learned this stuff. So, great question, Spidell. Thanks a lot for going right to the heart of what we're trying to talk about here. Because there is no awareness of monetary history within anarchist thought, much less within Marxist thought. This is completely foreign to them. Last week I accused the modern left of fighting against empty phrases. The same way Karl Marx accused the young Hegelians, the people he was arguing against, is fighting against empty phrases. The young Hegelians thought that consciousness, religion, is what creates life. It's like, nah, dude. Life creates religion. People create religion. And then, priests make us gold as money. And that's what leads us into cycles of war and poverty and destruction. So the other thing I'm trying to point out here too is that not only is monetary history, monetary awareness missing from Marxist thought and anarchist thought, it's not only missing from economics, it's missing from social sciences in general. It's missing from anthropology and from sociology. It's missing from psychoanalysis, as we point out. How does Freud's observations of neurosis in the early 20th century correspond to, the creation of this massive debt-based economy with the Federal Reserve and, the start of all these great wars like World War I? We have to relook at history now because of this collection of facts that Stephen Zarlenga has presented. Once you read this book, once you start looking at the history of how money is created, everything just starts looking a little different. It's apocalyptic. This strips away a lot of illusions for you. And, yeah. I could keep going on for a while. So, please, I gotta cut out here at some point. Please check out Greens for Monetary Reform. Do your homework. There's really great information on here that's been compiled. It's if you can't get your hands on the Lost Science of Money, at the very least, make sure you check out this all-important website, because it's everything you should have learned in high school but didn't. So if I can get back here, here, boom. All right, that's good enough. So with that, we're gonna cut out. We're gonna be back next Monday though with Fran Bowitt from Positive Money. We're gonna skip ahead. We're talking about the ancient past, and now we're gonna skip ahead to where Europe's at with monetary reform right now. She's going to talk to us about what she's been doing with the Dutch Parliament and the British Parliament. So I had a great time giving this lecture. Again, I'm going to upload it onto Greens for Monetary Reform, and check us out on Activate Media on Monday too. Thanks a lot.